Good day, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation number 179. Sorry we were a couple of minutes late. It was my fault. We were talking backstage. How are you today, Armin?
Yes, very good. Yourself?
Hang on.
Oh.
I thought I'd stopped this. It's that one. Okay. All right, there we go. Sorry, that was my normal Boomer Tech stuff, guys. It wouldn't be a Iron Duke stream if I didn't have a bit of Boomer Tech going on in there. Obviously, today we're, I presume, mostly going to talk about the general election results. I'm happy to say I've got Armin joining me, who is the original co-founder of this stream, which is now on number 179, which is pretty good. We've been going a long time. Did you have a first subject you wanted to bring up this evening, Armin?
No, it's basically all just been full on the election in it the last couple of days. There hasn't really been much else I can think of. No.
Yeah. I think it's mostly been the election, to be honest. People may have seen I was on a stream with Tim Wilms on his The Unshackled channel. We did a stream for the election, which was about 6 hours, I believe, and a couple of the guys from this stream joined us. Mitch joined us and AI joined us, so that was good. So yeah, my initial result, which you may have been able to tell if you watched that stream that I was on, is I was quite disappointed with the result at like 6 in the morning UK time. Having looked at it a bit further and thought about it a bit more, I don't think it was as disastrous as I thought it was initially. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Armin.
Yeah, I did. I actually saw your reaction. I did pop in and watch as the as they were going through like the exit poll.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, I understand. Like it like people look at it and they think, oh, you know, good fucking Lord, you know, 410 seats for Labour, reform. You know, at first we thought it was going to be 13 seats, an underperformance. It's easy, and of course the Tories still retained quite a few seats as well. So you're like, oh, it's literally just, you know, the worst of, yeah, it's literally like the worst of all worlds. But
that was my initial thought, although I don't really think that now, but I did initially, yes.
Well, the thing is that, yeah, it's kind of like, it's like, would you want Reform to get more seats? Like, kind of, yeah, but at the same time, like, they're not the Uber-based party. They're good at what their job is, I would think, which is to destroy the Tories. I'm not really sure if I want Reform to become the official opposition in time, although if they did, obviously I'd take it. But it's also like, you know, okay, yeah, the Tories could have got less seats, but it's like, you know, some people who've, we'll say like AA, for example, right? AA has this argument where he talks about, and obviously a lot of us are quite skeptical that he's just fallen into his old pro-Labour days, where he says that actually like a massive majority for Labour would be good for us. But and I'm not sure that's entirely true, but a massive majority of seats which no one fucking voted for kind of is a good thing for us.
Yeah. Yeah,
you know, you've now got AA.
The Labour vote is well down, Armin. Yeah, it's. I think they got under 10 million votes in the whole country.
Yes, 9.7. And I looked, and I actually made a mistake, because I tweeted the next morning and I said, and at the time when I tweeted it, I think they were on 9.45. And I looked and I thought, good Lord, no one's won a majority on a vote share that small since 1929. However, obviously they ended up resting on 9.7. Someone has won a majority on less votes than that since 1929, and that was Tony Blair in his last election that he ran in, which was what, 2006? Yeah, he won it with
I'm pretty
9.5.
sure. Listen, I'm not going to swear by this, but one of the things I watched, which was talking about this, I'm sure said that Tony Blair got a larger number of votes than that, though, which strikes me as strange given the population has gone up enormously since Tony
Yes.
Blair's last election. So I don't understand that, I've got to say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? So, like, technically, Keir Starmer did get more votes, but it's actually even a worse performance. I mean, even especially when
Because
you
of the
consider, like,
population,
yeah, like in 1929, which was one of the lowest. I mean, admittedly, before that, all elections were won on quite small amounts of votes, like 6 to 8 million. But when you consider that the population back then was
the people who could vote was less, and
yes,
until
yeah,
at the end of the First World War,
yeah. When I brought up the 1929 point in the office, I mean they were wrong factually, but it was still funny. One of the lads at the back was like, "Women couldn't even vote back then."
Yes, they could.
Yeah, they could, but
Yes,
it's still funny to
Yeah.
think that how few people could vote and how few people there was, and still,
Well, I mean,
they
the UK
almost get
population in
modern Labour
29
Party.
wouldn't have been the UK population in 1929 wouldn't have been that far over 40 million. I wouldn't have thought.
No,
And
although
it's
funny enough, the
60
population of
something
London.
now.
Yeah, although funny enough, the population of London was not much lower than it is now. That's a funny little thing that
Yep,
a lot of
because
people often
London was the
forget.
centre of the British Empire back then, even. So yeah.
Yeah, I think even just before World War II, it had over 8 million people, and now it's only just crossed over 9 million, which is pretty staggering to think about.
No, I think London's pretty well always been one of the world's largest cities. Like in the modern era, it's always been one of the world's largest cities. But
yeah.
I think
and
Ivola's sunglasses makes a good point that Reform are in second place in 100 seats. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're almost like, despite the fact you look at it and you think, oh, fucking hell, like, 5 seats or 4, depending on how you look at it. Is it 4 or 5? Anyway, they are like, it's still a hair's breadth away from being the opposition. And I've seen a lot of people complain about first past the post, and I do get it. It is very sad to look at it and see, the state of what your vote buys you. I was going to do some back of a sort of napkin maths and work out, how much your vote was worth as a Labour voter versus a Conservative or a Reform voter. I didn't get around to it, but it's pretty. It's pretty. It looks like a pretty sorry state, but there are obviously, like, the thing is, a lot of it's like a visual thing. You can be a really powerful party. Like, imagine if Reform had got 70 seats, like how much bigger their vote share would have been. They would have been literally nipping at the heels of Labour, even though the number of seats they had was minuscule by comparison. And that also, like, it affects the parties. I know people, that Kenny, is it named Kenny Smith, who runs Homeland Party. He was talking. There was a Twitter space that night as well, and he was talking in there, and he said, "Well, look, the election system is the election system. It just is what it is. They're going to rule as if they have power regardless." And it's like, he has a point, but at the same time, like, especially if you're Labour, you kind of see this with like the veganism stuff, right? You can't be like a Brahmin class pretend intelligentsia sitting there eating your ground up cockroaches and bugs whilst the people that you laugh at as gammons are eating steak and eggs. It's you have to actually act like an upper class person to be able to hold on to the social status. And if everywhere you go, people are laughing you out of rooms and turning their back on you whenever you speak, you can have all the seats you like, you can enact all the policy you like, but it is going to have a very sort of real psychological effect on the people in that party, and that varies depending on what level they're at. But And of course, the other end of this as well is that so first off, one of the problems with first past the post, of course, is that if you are a party that's specifically campaigning on an anti-immigration position, like we do in a non-homogenous, diverse society, you have this issue where the populations that have essentially are most likely to vote for an anti-immigration party are populations that have been displaced from their original communities, which means they're like a spread out vote. Which is literally, which is always,
Clacton, isn't it?
Yeah,
yeah. Clacton's full of refugees from Cockney refugees from London.
Yeah, and it's like in that instance, Clacton's like a good ground because it is a place where a lot of them have coalesced, but they are spread pretty far and wide elsewhere. Like in my village, on one side I've got like a liberal lefty single mum. And on the other side of me, I've got a former London bus driver who's like hardcore reform voter, as right wing as you come. It doesn't create for voting blocks in the same way that like immigration into these strong Labour urban zones does. That's the negative, though. There are obviously strong positives, like the fact that first past the post gives you an actual strong government. If you can cross the line, you're the king, right? And you need that if you're going to tackle the civil service. A lot of people give a lot of these European. Yeah.
I agree with what you're saying, Ammon. I was just going to say, I know Mitch I think changed his mind on proportional representation. Like Mitch used to support it, and I'm not sure he does now from what he was saying in the Discord earlier today. So, Mitch, what's your view on this first past the post versus proportional representation stuff?
I don't know if screen share will work for me, but there's like an interesting tweet about it.
Oh,
doesn't seem to be. I don't know how to do it, mate, and I try not to do anything complicated on this stream now because my potato of a computer will just fuck it up. So I don't,
If you want, you can post it in private chat, and I'll try presenting it from my side because I've got like monster fiber optic internet. So,
hang on,
you able to see this?
There's an add to the stage thing here, which will probably come on if I put it on. Let me see. There you go.
Yeah. So, this is why I'm not agreeing with PR stance anymore. Is like nowadays it's become a lot more marginal. Where back in 2019 you had the average MP sitting on a majority of just over 11,000. Now the average member of Parliament, especially the Labour ones, a lot of them are sitting on majorities of like 6,700 according to this. So that's a thing. Like PR is not really needed anymore when you've literally got this where, like for example, my seat, Gavin Williamson is the MP, but he only won with 5% or 6% of the vote in his favour. Keep in mind, last time he had one of the safest seats in the country for the Tories at 28,000 votes, and now he's got like can't remember what it was. That's 5 to 6%. So this is kind of a future where things are a lot more precarious and reform, especially like you take because I remember seeing Sunderland Central, for example, 7.7 swing from Labour towards reform, even though reform were behind by 8,000 votes in those areas. So what I would say is, sure, Labour have won a stonking majority, but it's on hollow ground. And if I were a Labour MP, especially up in the northeast of England, I'd be shitting bricks because, as we can see from the Labour cabinet, they are incompetent. Our Deputy Prime Minister is a woman with about 95 IQ, and we're not really, we're not going to expect good results from this government. So this is a one-term government as well because we only got a third of a vote. they got fewer votes than Blair did in 2005.
Well, David Lammy is going to be foreign secretary.
Yeah.
I'm going to find it funny though when I'm going to find it funny, like if you have a situation where, so you have possibly Donald Trump getting into the White House. And imagine Nigel Farage just giving him, just texting the Don just to go, oh yeah, David Lammy's coming. This is like X, Y, and Z. This is what you need to do. So you just have our foreign policy like being dicked on by Farage just by sending a few text messages.
I do think Farage has got a track record in getting support from working class seats for the Brexit vote. The Brexit vote was, I think I would be right in saying, majority white working class people were the people who voted for Brexit, such as myself, for example. But Farage has got a proven record of being able to get those people to support him. So, from that point of view, Farage and Reform have a huge advantage over the so-called Conservative Party, if you ask me.
Yeah. Avola Sunglasses in chat asks, hang on, where is it? I just lost it. Oh yeah. Do you think reforms free market economics and talking about the NHS will cap its support in the red wall? Shouldn't it stay focused on immigration? Yes. We were just talking about that before we we went live.
We were talking about that very point. That's why I put that up on the screen. You carry on, Armand, because I know your views are pretty much the same as mine on this.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is going to be a big problem for like Tice. You know, at the end of the day, Farage needs to make sure that these other MPs he's got in there just stay on message. And I mean, when Farage talked about the NHS, he threaded the needle quite well, I think. Where he was basically just saying like the system as it exists now is broken, and he wasn't talking about whether he's going to do this with it or that with it. He just says it needs to be reformed in some manner, which is probably the right thing to do if you have to talk about it. But like Tice can't seem to keep himself on rails in that way. He starts going down his sort of like conservative economics road, big C conservative economics road, and it's like it's not. You want to just stay away from that stuff. It's not why he got elected by the people that he did in Skegness and Boston.
Totally agree, mate.
Yeah, but I mean, one thing that is something that was disappointing in this election as well was because you had, of course, like Boomer Tice is messaging about screen. I wouldn't suppose if that cost votes, but also apparently because Reform were having like a lot of social media about how the young were more pro-reform than let's say pro-Tory, and yet in terms of the people who voted in this election, the people who actually bothered to vote, 14% voted Tory and 8% voted Reform among my age demographic. So I don't know what Reform will take from that, because they had a massive message about how the young were being drawn to Reform. And I felt
fair, to be fair, Mitch, I think you've got to say that Farage only had a month, right? He had a month to go from a standing start into running a general election campaign. I mean, all right, you can say that was partly his own fault because he only decided to run when the election was announced, but he did pretty well in 4 weeks.
There's a guy who was an election agent for one candidate near me, and he told me, the original plan for Nigel was he was going to announce on June the 24th he was going to come back, because they all thought the election was going to be in December, around that sort of time when the election would become.
I did.
And the original plan was Nigel was always going to come back around late June, but the fact that the election actually ended up getting called this early forced him to put his plans a bit forward. So Nigel coming back was always going to happen, according to this one guy I know in Reform.
Yeah, I could believe that.
So
I could certainly believe that.
Aubrey's asking about Elmo, and I said, "Well, this is a thing. There's a protest vote. Some of these people, like you've got Ken
It's
Binface.
also it's also a tradition in British elections that you will always get a couple of silly candidates in silly costumes. You just do. It's something that's gone on for decades and decades in Britain now.
Yeah, I always thought the Monster Raving Loony Party of the best, one of the best immigration policies. Has said, "Oh yeah, to deter mass immigration, we're going to put GP receptionists at the border checks."
Yeah, not bad. I kind of agree with that. I mean, look, what the Conservatives, in air quotes, of course, did much better than I was hoping they would do. I mean, I was very much hoping they were going to get well under 100 MPs, and they ended up in, I don't know, what is it, 122, 123, something like that.
121. They actually won one in Leicester, Leicester East, because of the Hindus, basically.
Lord.
But that is still their worst result since the 1830s.
Yeah,
That's
this is
the
the problem.
worst
The
Conservative
boomers will
result.
still keep voting Tory. This is the main problem you got. Is the boomers will still keep voting Tory, and what do you
There's
do
going to
with
be
it?
less and less of them, Mitch. There's going to be less and less boomers. There'll be less in 5 years than there is now.
Yeah, and it's
The trouble is, of course, is whether the Labour Party merely replace them with third-world immigrants, which I think is quite likely, but we'll see.
I suppose another thing to watch, because Farage just said something along the lines of, he's going to professionalise the party, so he's going to put down branch structures. Because to be fair, like, that's reform. You know, as you could tell by the local elections, they didn't really have much of a ground presence. At least in my area, they averaged like 27% of a council vote on average. So they didn't win, but it's still respectable showing, I suppose, even on the Tice. But I mean, I'm wondering. So between now and the next election, you have local council elections probably next year. I don't know if it's like 3 years because last one around me was 2021. Then there's the Senate in Wales in 2 years' time, and given that those seats where I think Llanelli, I mentioned in the Discord, where Reform were only like what 1,500 odd votes away from unseating the Labour candidate. So there's a good groundswell of supporting South Wales for reform. Because to be fair, it's like UKIP was still big in the area up until 2021 or something with Neil Hamilton and such. Then there's the Scottish Parliament. Now, I'm surprised Reform got 7% of the votes in Scotland. So perhaps they can get some MSPs and displace the Tories up there. But I mean, I don't think Farage will go campaigning up there, given what happened to him back in, was it 2014 or 2015, when he literally had to be inside a pub because of the dysgenic morons up there.
I think Farage could. I think he could do okay in some of the areas that depend, for example, on Royal Navy defence jobs and stuff like that. And some parts of the Highlands, I don't necessarily would see much point in him trying to campaign in Glasgow or parts of Edinburgh, but there's certainly parts of Scotland where he could campaign and might get some support.
Yeah, you noticed that the main places where he gets second place were east of England and north of England, like specifically the northeast. So I can't remember who was said on but like that's one thing they'll have to do. Tice's side of the reform leadership, they'll have to be reined in because they're the ones still keeping them with the whole diverse. Oh, look at us, how non-racist we are, blah blah blah. I imagine Farage will have to be ruthless with those types and get rid of them, or just sideline them completely so that they can't churn out any more crap like they did in Miss Lax also, which kind of made it look schizophrenic.
Yeah.
You get areas like mine where because I was campaigning for a reform candidate who I thought was going to get second place. No, he got third place, close behind the. He was only 1,000 votes behind the second place Conservative candidate. Well, say Conservative candidate for Conservative MP Amanda Millen, who I was surprised she got third, given she's completely useless. So that was a bit of a downhill in time. But I mean, you still got 11,000 odd votes in my neck of the woods where Reform could leverage that into council seats. So I'm hoping, but then again, as I said, do we think that Farage and Reform will get enough of a good local game going on in the next few years to come? I mean, UKIP suffers from the same problem.
He's got to turn it into a. He's got to turn Reform into a real political party if he's going to do this. And I think he's also got to put Tice fairly firmly in his place and keep him in line, because Tice comes out with the odd thing which is okay, but a lot of the stuff he comes out with just puts people off.
Yeah, I don't know what Farage would do that, because they're big powers.
Farage has got to hammer on mass immigration. Yeah, I think there are, but I think they disagree about the political direction of Reform. And if the guys on the Lotus Eaters are correct, who know people who are fairly high up in Reform, if they're correct, and I see no reason why they're not, Farage did not like those diversity ads. That was a Tice idea.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like, I mean, so I don't know how he's going to build up the party, because I'm thinking, well, because there's a guy who I was campaigning with who said this was the same problem with UKIP, where you'd have people with job titles like election agents who wouldn't actually do much of the work. So I don't know how successful Reform will be in terms of formalising their status on the electoral stage as a political party, because
they've got the votes. If you look at their vote share, they've got the votes to build on. They've only got 5 MPs. That's a disappointment. I think we would have all liked to have seen them got at least a dozen.
I mean, Labour won 2 in their first general election back in 1900, and they shut up like a rocket when turnout went up. Turnout went up with working class voting more, with franchise requirements going down. I reckon turnout will go up in the next election, because, as I was pointing out earlier, everything's a lot more marginal now. There's no such thing as a safe seat anymore. Like, you've had Tunbridge Wells, that's been Tory since day one, pretty much. Yeah, that's gone over to the
forever, yeah.
So you're looking at this election and go,
Ashford
I mean, yeah, and you're just looking at this and you go, there's no such thing as a safe seat in politics anymore. So that might get people to vote a lot more in future, because never feel their votes actually matter.
Well, the turnout was very poor.
Yeah, it's 59%.
The turnout at this election was very poor. Like, generally,
even in Canterbury, where I am, turnout was down 10%.
Yeah. But there was no great enthusiasm amongst anyone for, certainly not for the Labour Party, It was an anti so-called Conservative vote. It wasn't a pro-Labour vote for the most part.
Yeah, this is a one-term Labour government, because they've only got like 1/3 of the vote. That's fewer votes than what Tony Blair got in 2005. There's no way this Labour government is lasting beyond the term, to be honest. The main problem.
Well, the thing is, they've got no effective parliamentary opposition in terms of like MPs voting against them, because they've got 400 odd MPs, but then you've also got 70 Lib Dems who mostly support the Labour Party. I'd say at about 85-90% of their policies. You've got the 5 independent Muslim candidates who will also mostly support the Labour Party. And then, of course, you've got the, in air quotes, Scottish and Welsh nationalists, who are really not very nationalist at all for their actual people, who will also mostly support Labour policies. And, of course, the Greens will also mostly vote for most Labour policies. So there's no 25% of Starmer's MPs could rebel against him, and he'll still be able to get everything through because of all those smaller parties supporting him.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, that's another good reason to not support proportional representation, which I think that's one thing we could get reform to try and drop, because it's like was it 83 where it was something like you had the Labour Party and the SDP Liberal Alliance on equal shares of the vote, but Thatcher still got a stomping majority, and it's stuff like that where like that's the thing about the right in general is anyone worth their salt on the right at the moment they're all backing reform. So we've all collected our votes in around one party, whereas the left have got loads of parties with enough differences, quote unquote, to make people want to vote for them. Even though, as I said, it's a uni party, but I mean, the average voter out there is thick as pig shit. So don't bother trying to explain it to them because
much truth. John McNamara is asking, do we think Farage will have issues holding down Clacton? I don't know much about it, but I think Farage might find it hard to actually be the MP of the area while leading reform. I'm not sure. I mean, the thing is, he's going to be able to get any issues he wants to for Clacton to have an awful lot of publicity because he's not Farage, you know.
Well, I
don't know
mean,
what you guys think.
I'd say in terms of I lost my train of thought. I'd say I lost my train of thought. I'll pass over to Asman. I forgot what I was going to say.
I was just going to say that people do often overlook the leader of a party's local performance. Usually, if you have like a party leader, I remember talking to someone who lived in David Cameron's old constituency, and they were just like, "Oh, we basically don't have an MP, you know, because our MP is like leader of the country." But they see that almost as a personal point of pride, and of course, it's different for a prime minister than it is for a party leader. But I still think for the reform voters in that town, Farage's like pure sort of like pulling power will be sort of enough to tide them over. And if they see, if people see good performances of him on the TV, like, because that's the other thing. I mean, you know, of course, the problem with our sort of like modern age is that people aren't digesting anything on a local level. Really, everything they get is from national coverage. Not so much from the TV now, a lot of it online, but still the same sort of thing. So there's often a lot more prestige, I suppose, that can be bought for someone who is maybe more present on the national stage from their local constituents. But it's hard to say.
Yeah, another thing is Farage, he had the biggest swing acting in his favour in his own constituency, something like 46% swing in his favour. The second biggest swing for one candidate was Jeremy Corbyn in Islington North at 40% swing in his favour against Labour. So that kind of sets, like, that kind of puts them Clacton as, yeah, I don't see Farage getting voted out next election unless he really screws up big time through whatever means. But as ever, the Sunclass will say, if they can't hold Clacton, then they're pretty much done as a party. So, and it's like the same with yeah, I'm hoping that I don't know how old that James McMurdoch fellow is who won Basildon South. I don't know how old he is. I heard like 38, which I thought he was younger than that. Going off one photo I saw of him. I'm hoping he will de-boomerize. He'll get Nigel to de-boomerize some of the messaging, because as evidenced by this election, the boomers won't go out and vote an actual right-wing party because they want their pensions, so they'll vote Tory. But they're not going to vote Reform on an anti-immigration ticket alone. So
possibly not. Yeah, I mean, look, I do think one of the things we need to talk about. I mean, has everyone seen AA's video about this election?
Yeah, I did. I watched it while I was in the gym though, so I've only sort of half listened to it.
Well, I do. Most of what he said, I agreed with. I do think he's correct that Peter Hitchens did a lot of damage because he was playing defence for the so-called Conservatives, which I really don't know why. I mean, because he's not stupid enough to think that he could have stopped this Labour victory. I mean, surely, you know.
Yeah,
No,
but
it's-
he
it's-
sorry, Mitch, go on.
I'll just say he's a boomer. That's all you need to know.
Yeah, like it kind of seemed like Hitchens just wanted to set up someone to blame. Like he almost wanted to help set up a scapegoat, not help, but he like in his own mind, he's sort of like he knew he probably couldn't stave off any sort of Labour victory, and he's instead like created this boogeyman whereby he can sit around for the next 4 years and go, oh, but we'd have the Tories in power, we wouldn't have all these issues if those people hadn't voted reform, as if that would have saved the Tories anyway. But of course, like I do think that AA is probably given Hitchens a little too much credit. Like he implied that like Hitchens had like a very influential readership, which I'm not entirely sure. I doubt, but like Johnny Mercer like was turning around going, "Oh, who is this guy?" You know, and of course all these other like sort of CCHQ types are like, "Oh yeah, who even is that guy?" So I
think he has a lot of look in the sort of Daily Mail readership. He has quite a lot of boomer readers from there, for sure. And I just don't think he did it. He didn't do us on the right any favors by playing defence for the Conservatives. That's for sure. I don't think he was decisive by any means, because I think this election was always going to be what this election was going to be. It was going to be about voting against the Conservatives, not for Labour, really. But I thought AA was correct about that up to a point. Of course, the mainstream media ran a smear campaign for the last 2 weeks of the election against Farage and reform, which I don't suppose will ever get addressed, sadly, but they certainly did. Although some of the stuff that they were trying to smear them for is the sort of stuff that I just totally agree with, frankly, but whatever. There's that. I mean, the one thing about AA's little video was he really didn't address Farage and reform hardly at all. So, maybe he's waiting to do that.
I mean, I did think he kind of said everything that needed to be said ultimately, though. There isn't really that much to cover on the reform thing. That situation kind of is what it is. Broadly speaking, I don't think anyone really sees reform as some great political solution. They're just part of a plan and solution going forward. So it's it's in a way, I think if reform had swept in and won 100 seats somehow magically, that would actually probably just lead to more disappointment for us in the future.
Maybe. Very difficult to say. On the one hand, you see, I don't support these guys who say you shouldn't vote, because none of the globalists or lefties will give a shit if none of us vote. None of us, none of our audience. If we don't vote, they will not care. Look at Portugal.
I mean, I think they will,
Portugal
but
consistently has.
Yeah.
Not much they won't, mate. Honest, as long as they get power, it's like I don't see Labour. I mean, there's going to be guys in the back room of the Labour Party probably who are going to be saying, "Oh yeah, we actually got a very low vote share," but they won't care. They got 420 odd MPs. They don't care how much of the vote share they got.
Well, yeah, but they will. This was kind of what I was saying at the beginning, and kind of similar to what Mitch was covering with the marginal seats thing. They won't. They will try to pretend like they don't care, and they'll try to push through power as if they don't care. But it will hollow them out in some way. They won't. It's one thing to sit within your own little groups in whatever London areas and talk about policy and just push it through and just go, oh well, 410 seats, and there will be some aspects of the party that can exist within that paradigm, but there will also be large parts, especially like local MPs, where like any event they get to gets no reception, or any TV program they go on just gets no viewers. It's much harder for them to operate under those conditions. They can't pretend to be a leader or pretend to be in a position of leadership when that when no one treats them as such.
Oh, look, I absolutely get that. But I think just giving up on politics totally and not voting particularly I think that's just counterproductive. It doesn't gain us anything. You know, when you're given a vote and an election comes up, to my mind, you might just as well have cast it for the least worst person, basically, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Like at the end of the day, your vote's free. It's one of the few bits of tools they're actually willing to still give you. You might as well just go and tick it in a box. I might have well, if it was still just the big free voting in my area, I would have just looked up whoever was the smallest and just voted for them, just to cause the tiniest little bit of trouble that I can. You know.
Yeah, because as you rightly say, voting doesn't cost you anything, and it takes half an hour or so. So,
well, yeah, and of course, like this is a point
that
a certain Persian former academic has made, but you can't. When Tony Blair got like record low vote turnout and thus a record low vote share, he just said that it was because people were happy with the status quo, not that he was up against Michael Howard and people literally had no one to vote for.
True. Yeah, absolutely right. And people were getting sick of him by then, anyway. But I just think come an election, it's always better to vote than not vote, because if you don't vote, for the most part, the powers that be, whether you call it the cathedral or whether you call it the deep state or what have you, they don't care if people on the right don't vote. In fact, they probably prefer us not to vote in many respects.
Yeah. I mean, then again, though, this kind of goes into like the Al Shire Tory point you had up previously about how it reinforces kayfabe. Yeah, it does, which is also part of the reason why you don't want Reform to sweep in with a massive number of seats on the first try and just become the new Tories. The utility behind Farage is that he's in that house. Because the thing is, as well, after every election, they try to, and usually successfully, put immigration away because they've got no impending votes to worry about. They can just stop talking about it and just go radio silence. If you've got him in the house just constantly talking about it, they can't do that. That's kind of the one benefit to it.
Very true. Very true. And as I was saying before we went on air, Adam, the advantage that Farage has now is that any speech he makes in Parliament, of course, is under parliamentary privilege. So he can say quite a lot of things in Parliament which he wouldn't be able to say on, say, the TV.
Yeah.
Like in an interview or something, because speeches in Parliament are protected by parliamentary privilege, which means, if he wants to be a little bit radical when talking about mass verbal immigration, he can do so much more easily from an MP's bench than he can in a TV interview.
Yeah. Although he would, his strategy long term, I posted this video up back when he first announced that he was running, but his strategy long term seems to have always been that he wants to sort of lead the public essentially by the nose a little bit to where they need to go to. So, but of course, the problem with him as well, as I've noticed, as he's getting older, and it's harder as well, I think, especially for an older person to keep a finger on the pulse. He's probably not quite so astute about where the public currently are, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend like the public are secretly all hard right like us. They're right wing death squads ready to rise up, but it's just I'm not saying one or the other. I'm just saying it's hard for him to gauge where that exactly is. I think they're probably a little to the left on certain issues and a little onto the right on certain issues than a lot of us probably appreciate. But
I think they're socially conservative and economically more left wing. Yes,
yeah,
I think that.
But they can also be sadly quite left wing on things like the homosexuality and stuff like that too. It's
sadly that is true. That is true. Can I just say to Goth bureaucrat in the chat who's saying why no super chat function on here? You can send us a super chat if you look at the top of the chat. you'll see there's a pinned message, and you can do it via entropy.
Is it up there?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it
On
is.
the top
Yeah.
of the chat. If you look right at the top of the chat, just click on that link, and you can send us super chats, or you can support the channel if that's what you want to do. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Alan, in terms of that stuff. I think what Farage has got to be now is he's got to be a gadfly, constantly bringing up mass immigration, like every bloody week, basically.
Yeah.
That's got to be what he does, and if he keeps doing that, and he can keep Tyson, what have you, in line, I think that his support is just going to grow, because it's definitely an issue which normies do now perceive, that their towns and villages and cities are changing around them, and they can see it. You can't hide it anymore. It's just too big now.
Yeah. And of course, the thing is as well with reform that I don't think people quite appreciated, and this is why. I mean, I liked obviously 0 seats as a slogan and everything else, but some of the stuff people were saying about it, where they were basically implying you should vote Labour and stuff like that. Even if they got less than 100 seats, the Tories weren't going to die from one bad election. They need to double tap. You know, that you need to. It's going to take a little more than that to kill them. So you actually kind of do need a small potential future opposition, who I kind of hope won't be the future opposition, but that's a different discussion. Just to drain even more votes from them for a second election on the trot, and that will hopefully be the thing that does finish them.
I think academic agent may have been right about the Conservative Party splitting. I do think that is possible, because the really lefty Conservatives are now really lefty, you know. And what I don't like is all the supposed, in air quotes, right-wing Conservatives. None of them are actually British, you know. They're all the likes of Braverman and what have you.
Someone mentioned that in chat, I think, as well. But yeah, that will be. And of course, to be honest, I think the Braverman thing is they're going to lose ultimately, because there's not much utility to them, because there's already a Reform Party for people to go to, and there's not much. And the thing is, well, you can tell that the internal mechanics of the party align with like the Jeremy Hunt faction, because when it came to them helicoptering candidates around, they for the most part, although they definitely didn't do it for everyone, they moved some of the wettest people to the safest seats. You know, as if very much like the inner party is of a certain thing, and it was preparing for a flood. And the thing it's for is the sort of Jeremy Hunt sort of New Labour stance. So
I
don't see how
carry on.
They're going to try and get up. They're going to try, you know, like bad Enoch woman. They're going to try and get up her into leader of the Tory party. So I don't really see the Tories being able to win the next election. And given, like, at least the Tories could afford to do all the infighting and all the crap back in like Michael Howard and Ian Duncan Smith's time, like 20 years back, because there was no right-wing alternative. And the BNP were never going to supplant the Tories. But now you got Reform, and we've got a couple of big donors behind them. Like there was one English guy, I can't remember. Like he was like English millionaire or something who funded him. Then that Zia Youssef fella, which I hope he doesn't tilt the party to be too moderate for our liking. But yeah, like, I'm looking at this and go, I think Sultan Mush on Twitter, who's a good chap, he reckons the Tories will try to chase after the Lib Dem voters, and eventually they'll just fold into them, while the actual Conservative types still in the Conservative bar, they'll just bugger off to Reform. I don't know about Suella Braverman and those.
That could happen. That could happen. What I don't want is for a lot of. I don't mind if like one or two or even three Conservative MPs defect to Reform. I wouldn't object to that at all, but I don't want a lot of them to, because that will have a bad effect, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's. I still think like if you were to imagine the Tory beast in his form, I don't think he'll try to flood into reform. I think they'll try and join him with the Lib Dems. So they're going to try and show up the South, and then think that they can outweight Farage, because of course Farage, we still don't know what's going to happen after he goes. So.
And Sonny Jim points out this obvious fact in the chat, and yeah, totally agree. And to me, that is enough for me not to support any of those three people, because they're not.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what Braverman's like real modus operandi is. She does. I don't know. She kind of comes off marginally as slightly based, but she is ultimately still brown, and therefore shouldn't be in reform if she tried to make the switch. But you know, there are also brown people already in reform that that need to be sidelined in some way.
Yeah.
But I'll point out as well to say about like the Lib Dem point. Like you know, my local constituency was Canterbury, and Canterbury has I don't think it's ever had a Lib Dem MP, or at least it hasn't done for a very long time. But it has had Lib Dem councils. It has a fair sized Liberal Dem base, and both the Tories and Labour lost their vote share. And Reform, it didn't do amazingly. It came third place. The candidate, you know, it was kind of a bit of a doomed place for Reform to run. But I was still quite surprised at how well she did, off of you know, so the campaign generally being so badly organised and there being so few people to help. And of course, the area it was in, I think she was sort of well over halfway to supplanting the Tories as the official second.
Yeah, I don't think we should underestimate the strength of the Reform's vote in this election. I mean, they came second in over 100 seats. So, you know.
Yeah.
AI Shire Tory in the chat is saying turf. I don't know who he's talking about, but someone's a turf apparently. But you know, I have had this discussion before about turfs. They're not our friends. Just because they're not into trannies going into little girls' bathrooms does not make them our friends. We can support them when they're doing that, as I certainly do. But in other respects, they're mostly still feminists. So, you know. And they're not worried about male spaces at all. I think it's.
I don't know if we're talking about actual. If we're talking about actual turfs, then I'll just say if it comes to blows, I'll put my money on the one with the Adam's apple. But anyway, but of course, you know, even in my city, which has had a fair sized Lib Dem voting base for a while, you know, Reform just blasted past them and past the Greens, despite us having obviously a large student population. So yeah, it was Rosie Duffield. It was kind of annoying actually, because I may or may not have made some propaganda that was supposed to go over election signs, but the ones that they put up in my area, they basically didn't see. They weren't Labour signs. They were literally just elect Rosie Duffield signs. Like she was the she's become like the sort of Grand Chancellor of Canterbury almost. And yeah, which is kind of funny.
All right, guys, we've got another question from the chat. What did we think of the results in Wales and Scotland?
I didn't pay much notice to Wales. The result in Scotland was very interesting, though. I think someone earlier on was like, you know, the SNP actually suffered a bigger collapse than the Conservatives did. It's a funny one. It is kind of interesting. It's obviously a shame that they've gone sort of to Labour, but you know.
Yeah, I think the corruption in the SNP didn't do them any favours. And also, I don't think the Pakistani in a kilt Hamza Yusuf was all that popular either, to be honest.
Yeah,
I mean, this is the thing about these so-called nationalist parties in Scotland and in Wales. They're not nationalist parties to the extent that they're supporting real Scottish or real Welsh people. Not at all. It's they want infinity mass migration into Scotland and into Wales.
Yeah.
And every other possible thing they can think of that is actually against the local people. And I would like to think, because I've lived in Scotland and I've known lots of Scots people. I mean, we've got some good Scotsmen on our Discord, as you know, guys. And the Scots are fairly canny on the whole, and I just hope maybe they're starting to see through the SNP. It's like they're not actually all that pro-Scottish.
Yeah, someone posted up that apparently the SNP battle bus was actually the old Celtic football team, the Celtic football team bus, but which is kind of ironic if true. But one of the things I was quite surprised at that someone illuminated me to a couple of months ago. I always have this thing when I argue with Scottish shitlibs that essentially they don't really have a say on immigration because they basically live in an ethno state. But someone pointed out to me, one of our, someone on our side of things, who was like, actually, you'd be surprised that even though Scotland is still essentially an ethno state, or at least it was until very recently, Scotland is the Scottish public is still overwhelmingly against immigration to the same extent that the English are and have been for years.
I think that's true. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's true. And also, certainly if you go to Glasgow and Edinburgh, which are obviously the biggest cities, there's a lot of immigration in those places, especially Glasgow, which was not the case even 25 years ago. Just wasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to quite like Glasgow as a town. It was a bit rough around the edges because it was a mostly working class shipbuilding type place, But you could walk around Glasgow and you just wouldn't see non-white guys or girls. You just wouldn't. And that wasn't all that long ago, really.
Yeah, in terms of Wales, I mean, you've got the Senate, which is going to look interesting in a couple of years' time when we see reform start to stack up in there, because South Wales has always been very receptive towards UKIP, and now in the case now you've got reform. Whereas up in Scotland, reform got 7% of a vote up in Scotland, so I won't be surprised if you might get a couple of MSPs up there. But I suppose
that's not too terrible. That's not 7%'s not bad for the first election they've run with almost no organisation. It's not terrible.
Yeah, I'm hoping. It's quite sad. Scotland is the way it is. I remember reading that. So while we legalised abortion over in 1967 or 68, it was only in 1980 it was allowed in Scotland because Scotland was still dragging the balls along in terms of the social liberalism that Roy Jenkins was doing. So it's quite some. Are the pendulum swings up there with reform or someone else later on, like the Coleman Party?
Well, I mean, when we say that the Celtic nationalists Celtic nationalists is not even correct because they're not. They're the opposite of that, really. But the supposed Celtic nationalists in Scotland and Wales, they're exactly the same as if you look at Sinn Féin in Ireland. Sinn Féin in Ireland, which was originally like the political wing of the Provisional IRA, Brits out and all the rest of it, they're totally Somalians in now.
But weren't they
they're one
sort
of the
of
main people in Ireland, like pushing mass immigration into Ireland? Sorry,
but weren't they kind of reshaped between old Sinn Féin and the sort of resurgence? Weren't they kind of reshaped by America?
I'm not sure.
It's just it was kind of funny that as soon as they started facilitating
Sinn Féin, the leadership was the leadership of Sinn Féin was always Marxist. Yeah. Your Jerry Adams and what have you were basically Marxists.
Yeah. But like when they were first around, like you think back to like the early 20th century, and they were basically like full on fascists.
Well, yeah, but that was the old IRA.
That's what I'm saying. But when you got the when the new model arose, it's just always seemed funny to me that as soon as they were in a position to facilitate the receipt of American money, they just immediately like almost completely structurally identical to that of what America was pushing as foreign interests basically everywhere else too.
Yeah,
So
no,
I should say
you're
I've got
totally
absolutely
right.
no proof for this.
Yeah.
I'm
I think
certain it's probably true.
I think you're pretty spot on, Adam. And the original IRA, like the old-fashioned IRA going back to the 1920s and stuff, those guys were pretty fashy. They were.
Mm.
But the provisional IRA, like in the Troubles era, from the 1970s onwards, the leadership of that was always Marxist.
Mm. Yeah.
But I do believe you're probably right about the US money coming in. I mean, they were getting lots of weapons off the Americans and so on. Of course, not the American government, but unofficially they were getting
unofficially,
US weapons,
like a dragged across the border job, or similar.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think John McNamara, who I think is Irish, is pretty much in the right of it for what he's saying here. It was after the 1940s that they began to go Marxist.
Yeah.
I think the Irish nationalists today, particularly the anti-immigration dudes in Ireland, yes, they have gone to the right because they've seen that, you know, Marxist types like Sinn Féin are just for infinity black and brown immigration into Ireland, and the Irish population is not very big, so it won't take very long for the native Irish to be completely displaced.
Yeah,
because it's such a small population, and of course, the same to some degree is true in Scotland. Because the Scottish population is not especially big. I mean, they get far more MPs than the similar number of Englishmen would get. I mean, there's about 5.5 million Scots, including the immigrants, and yet they get far more MPs, almost twice as many MPs as that same number as the English voters would get. And that goes right back to the Act of Union in the 18th century, you know.
Yeah, it's the Irish one's a funny one. I mean, on one hand, we've been putting up with this change a lot longer than they have. Like, obviously, and you see this in so many places. Like, when these places actually win their independence, they immediately go quite right wing for a while, because that's kind of like that's kind of the position of the people. And while they're still trying to like restructure and build up a proper regime, you know, they kind of end up. But of course, they've gotten it under the thumb now, and the transformation that's happening in Ireland now, even though they're a little bit behind the trend, is so fast compared to even what we're seeing here. You know, I think it's stark to go to English towns that I haven't been to in 5 years and see that the demographics have shifted by sometimes 15 to 20%. But it seems like in some parts of Ireland, it's even worse than that. When I made a little Bowden edit a while back, and there was a bit in, I forget the name of the speech, but there's a bit where he says about like what was all that nationalistic fervor and sectarian violence for, if they were just going to, you know, become another globalist hellscape. And I was like, oh, you know, I know there's some clips around that I can use for this of like, you know, diversity in practice, you know, that I can use for this. Is there going to be enough? And actually I looked, and there's tons. There's yeah, you can just look in like one Irish town or one city, and there'll be dozens of videos of certain demographics fighting and brawling in the street and running around with machetes and setting fire to stuff. It looks pretty bleak.
Yeah, no, I've seen some of it because I do follow some of the Irish nationalist channels, and yeah, you're totally right, mate. 100%. And when I say Irish nationalist channels, I'm talking about real Irish nationalists, not Sinn Féin, of course.
Yeah, you're thinking about Justin Barrett and Clan Erin. You're not thinking of you're not thinking of Jerry Adams and Great Dildo nationalism.
Indeed not. No.
Yeah.
I did 2 tours in Northern Ireland in the 1980s. Mitch, you're never going to catch me supporting those bastards. So, you know.
Yeah, and it's I think Ireland are slightly screwed for the time being in the sense that their nationalist movement is at the moment still involved in fighting between Justin Barrett and what's his name, Justin Reynolds or something like that in the National Party. So that adds a thorn in my arse. But I mean, the way Ireland is going, they've got a lot more revolutionary potential, in my opinion, at this point than the French. And even when France is looking interesting, where the quote unquote the far right Marine Le Pen, who was cooked pretty hard on what her party used to stand up for, she's going to get a better plurality. So she'll be the largest party, but everyone will block her. And
yeah, I was watching, Mitch, I was going to talk about that because I was watching that the other day. In fact, today I was watching some stuff about this, and it looks like you're right. And like the left and centre, so Macron's lot, and also all the commies and socialists are all kind of withdrawing candidates, so that there's only one not Le Pen candidate to vote for. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's the thing. So like the French system, I mean, I can imagine the system. If they were forced to bring in PR, they'd bring in something like the French system to screw it. So we'd go from frying pan of FPTP in our system to the French system if we were to have any sort of proportional representation. So this is why Farage shouldn't really campaign about it too much, in my opinion. But that's what's going to happen if we do end up getting some sort of PR. Is I'll just come up with a system that screws us over anyway. And I think there was the French version of the Tory party, Level with Republicans, who so their leader tried to ally with Marine Le Pen, but he got cooed off by the board, like by the Republicans version of the NEC, pretty much. So there's not even that many allies.
That was the Gaullists. Was that the Gaullists? The Gaullists who were trying to do that, wasn't it? I believe, Mitch. It was the Gaullist party. So, one of their guys wanted to ally with Le Pen and basically got the sack because of that.
I don't know what I don't even know where de Gaulle was on political spectrum. I always thought he was more left leaning. To be honest, I don't know if he was right wing or what in terms of French politics. So,
well, I mean, it's like Le Pen is not actually very right wing in most respects. She's quite left wing. She used to be at least anti-immigration.
Well, I mean, essentially, her point about opposing mass immigration is, oh, look at these Muslims. They won't let us have gay pride parades. Therefore, we must turf them out. That's essentially her opposition to them. And to be fair, like there's a lot of youth going against them, going against and by voting for Le Pen, which I don't know why that doesn't replicate over here. Like why we don't have the youth massively supporting reform. That might change in the next 5 years because if Starmer allows 16-year-olds to vote, because Farage is quite good at a tick-at-the-top game, and yeah, but there was one.
Yeah, I mean the level of young people support that Reform and Farage got was pretty good, I thought, actually.
Well, I mean, someone on social media, I can't remember. I think it was a guy called Samuel Martin, who's like Mallard type, like sort of conservative. He said, "Oh yeah, a lot of these young people, they'll take pictures and selfies with Farage, they won't actually vote for him." And I'm just thinking, if that is so, then I just reach up with my generation and go, "Fuck it, like, there's no point pallying towards young people."
I've watched some interviews though, Mitch. I've watched some interviews on the Lotus Eaters and what have you, with like ordinary young working class brick guys, you know, like 20, 21. There was one bloke who was actually who just left the army and stuff like this, and they were pretty pro Farage and anti-immigration, anti-mass immigration, because you know, you know yourself, being a young man, that your chances of buying a house and having a decent career and a family and all the rest of it are not great at the moment. So, you know,
Yeah.
I think there is a constituency there for Farage to go after in the younger generation, for sure.
Yeah, because it's going to be schizophrenic. Because on one hand, you've seen all of these polls are saying, "Oh yeah, young people oppose mass immigration. Young people have a much higher opinion of Farage." I mean, it's like 35% of 16 to 17-year-old blokes, they like Farage and are planning to vote Reform if they were unable to have a vote under Starmer's plan. So there's that. But then we see in this election, apparently only 8% of Zoomers bothered to vote for Reform. Now, to be fair, it might just be very low turnout, because to be fair, turnout was low across the board. So that might actually make it much better for the next election when Reform become a lot more established, and this is where that younger chap, that James McMurdoch from Basildon, will really come into play, where it is turning Reform into the party that appeals to the youth, like in terms of like the young white working class.
He's
I hope he does that.
he's the dude who had his mum and dad watching the vote count.
Yeah, he won by 120
Or was
odd
it was
votes, I
a
believe.
count?
In
Yeah, and he
Basildon
didn't
South.
he didn't have an election manager or anything like that. So when he was talking to Farage on the telephone, Farage
Yeah, he
says
was a
to him,
paper candidate.
"Who have you got watching the count?" And it was his mum and dad. So
Yeah, that's me. It's funny how he was a paper candidate and he actually ends up winning against the Tories, and I'm thinking, wow, yeah, because I was watching Isabel Oakshott, who's Tice's girlfriend, basically, and she was like, "Oh yeah, he was a paper candidate. No one knew anything about him. We just put him out because we needed someone to fill the spot, and no one expected him to win. So there wasn't really that great deal of resources. It was because, to be fair, I mean, it's like the same with the candidate I was campaigning for. All these candidates are doing everything off their own back. They're not really getting central funding from party headquarters because, of course, the nature of the party in this election. So the fact that this bloke, who I don't know how old he is, because some people say £38, and I go, I thought he was 28, but I don't know. Managing
yeah, he
to
looks
win.
younger than that to me, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but as I said, like it doesn't matter if it's 28 or 30. The fact is, he will de-boomerize some of the messaging, because at the end of the day, he will have his finger. Because I think it was Napoleon who said you can't trust a man below the age of 40 to be a partaker in revolutionary politics, because they just won't understand it. It's like Jeremy Corbyn LARPing as a revolutionary. It's like, well, he's in his 70s. He's not going to understand how mass immigration screws over guys like me. He's not going to understand. You know, like if I was in the room with Corbyn, I think Corbyn would just have an aneurysm just trying to talk, like, you know, because I don't think he'd understand how I've got a revolutionary zeal about destroying the Tory party and Labour Party over mass immigration as a chief issue, among other reasons. For example,
There's an interesting point from Caravaggio
Caravaggio.
in the chat. The gloves need. Thank you. The gloves need to come off politically. Question is Farage the man for the job? Is he willing to play for all the marbles? Well, what do you think, guys?
I'll let Ataman answer this one.
If he's back, I know he went somewhere for a little while. He said he'd be right back. He may not be there yet.
Oh, I thought he'd be back. I thought he was back. Personal opinion. He has been in politics for a much longer time, so he's not got that inborn naivety in the same way that Trump had in 2016. Because of course, Trump never had any political office, did he, before 2016? He kind of catapulted himself into it and allowed himself to get outmaneuvered. I don't know where Farage is, because at the moment he just looks like a disruptor, and we don't know what's going to happen by 2030 after the next election is done and dusted. Because he said, you know, because you got to think he's 60 years old. He wants to spend his latter end of his 60s onward in retirement. He doesn't want to have. So this is where the right really have to spend a lot of his energy, is getting a leader to take after Farage, preferably someone who's a millennial. Like this James
Farage
McMurdoch.
is, if you compare Farage to Trump and certainly bloody senile Biden, he's a youngster. I mean, he's 10, 12 years. What is he? 14 years younger than Trump, something like that.
Farage. Trump was born in 45, and Farage was born in 64. So 19
Well, there you
years
go.
difference. Yeah.
Different generation. Like Farage is basically my age. He's a year.
Yeah,
He's a year older than me.
Yeah, but the issue is, and Farage said himself, like he wasn't going to be around from 2030 onward because he planned to retire. Not this election, but the one after, like the 2029 election or 2028, depending on what time, which year you think it's going to happen. Because, as I said, this Labour government's not going to last a full term. Not going to last a full term. It's not going to last beyond one term.
I would just say this, Mitch. I mean, do you really think that if Farage was to win the 2028, 28, 29 election, do you really think he'd retire if he became Prime Minister? Because I don't myself.
Well, it wouldn't retire now because he's in that top dog position. The issue is, this is where, because on one hand, Farage is right, he's going to come for Labour in a lot of these northern cities. And this is the thing, it'll be very interesting to see, not just the Senate and Scottish Parliament elections, those local elections, but any by-elections for Parliament. You can imagine Reform will go heavy on most, especially if they're in like northeast or east of England.
I think they could do quite well in by-elections, yes. Yeah, because given they're second in over 100 seats, yes, they could definitely do very well in by-elections for sure.
Yeah, and I mean it's like you had similar circumstances work to Workers' Party with Rochdale, so like even like so yeah, you can imagine parties outside the two main ones because you got to think. I posted on my Discord. And as well as on Twitter, Keir Starmer's own constituency, his vote share went down by half. Like he had 36,000 voters in 2019. This election, his total number of voters is 18,000. So half of his voters either stayed at home or just voted for other candidates.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, look, Labour's not popular. Starmer's certainly not popular. He's got no charisma whatsoever. He's one of the least charismatic men I think I've ever seen. It's like
yeah, and as I said, you've got a deputy leader who's a complete retard.
Oh, that woman, yeah, no, she's a sicko, but yeah. And also, there's a good potential row there between her and the Labour Muslim supporters.
Yeah.
Which I'm quite happy to sit on the sidelines and watch them argue.
Yeah, the funny thing is, right, so in her constituency, Ashton-under-Lyne, which is over in Manchester, so I was expecting Workers' Party to come second and to come in serious distance of ousting her like they did with Jess Phillips, where Jodie McIntyre, that cerebral palsy fella down in Birmingham, nearly unseated Jess Phillips by nearly 700 votes. I thought the Workers' Party was going to do the same to Angela Rayner. That didn't happen. The Reform candidate, a guy called Robert Barrowcliff, who's like a former wrestler, I think he's only like a couple of years older than me. I think he's second place with 24.8% of vote to Angela Rayner's 42%. So the Muslim vote seems to have consolidated around her in that particular constituency and not behind Workers' Party. But you get down in Birmingham where a lot of the Labour candidates are a lot more marginal. So Birmingham in next election, I reckon will go more Islamist, like Palestine stuff, because this is a good question.
I mean,
what do we reckon?
We've got to say there are 5. Am I right, Mitch? There's 5 independent Muslim candidates who got elected.
They're including Jeremy Corbyn.
And those guys, of course, they're going to mostly vote with the Labour Party.
Yeah, one of those is
4.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Okay, so there were 4.
No, the point Jeremy Corbyn in is, of course, very
what I mean is there's
too, so
4 actual Muslim guys.
Yeah, but I mean, let's face it, Jeremy Corbyn
that's
was
not a
Muslim.
good thing for British politics to have. Yeah, well, true, but it's not a good thing for British politics to have a ethnic group like that. Although I don't know how you can have that, and then these people can argue that it's not all right for British people to have an ethnic group. If you see what I mean?
Yeah, this is one thing where we need to push forward. She keeps going over Martin Luther King kind of crap about all individuals and blah blah blah. It's like, well, yeah, we need to pressure against that. Because I mean, like for example, there's a guy who was a local election candidate for reform in my local area, who so Tice said he got rid of this guy because, of course, this guy was photographed at a rally with Samelia. But the thing is, this guy is he works with speakers. He's an audio-visual guy, so people never even met Samelia, but doesn't matter. The fact Tice was willing to defecate the bed over this was enough. The guy was still canvassing for reform, so they didn't get rid of him. So I don't think I think Tice. I think it was just I think like reform aren't actually getting rid of these types as much as people think. Because I mean, there's also that Bournemouth candidate by the name of Ben Aston, who basically our guy. Like he's been saying a lot of things about the JQ while he was a reform candidate then in Bournemouth. So reform seem to be quite a bit schizophrenic, to say the least, in regards to how they vet their candidates. 1 minute they're getting rid of a guy because, like, they're getting rid of Dan from Brokenomics for being sensible, pretty much, on a Muslim question. But then you've got this guy who's talking about the JQ and he doesn't get turfed out. And I'm thinking, yeah, it's very schizophrenic organisation for the time being. Unfortunately, that's not going to last because Nigel has indicated he's going to go no mercy mode on a lot of people to the right of him, unfortunately. So we can't make do with that. That's why I'm not bothered to join Reform, because they'll find something in my internet history, they won't like it, and I won't be able to become a candidate. So I'm not bothering to join Reform.
I think we've got to wait and see what happens with that stuff. Unlike quite a lot of people, I think that Farage's power level is a bit higher than he sometimes shows in terms of his realism on mass immigration, etc. I might well get disappointed on this, but I think possibly he's a bit more base than he sometimes appears to be. I mean, especially you've got to look at how much the mainstream media tried to smear him and Reform over the last couple of weeks of the election. So from that point of view, I like to think he was just boxing clever, if you see what I mean. I don't think there was any excuse whatsoever for Tice to sack Dan and also Bo, the other dude, the history bro dude. There was no excuse for sacking those two at all. But then the only good thing about that is it happened under Tice. It didn't happen under Farage. It was before Farage came back. So, and I'm no fan of Tice. I really don't like him at all. But
yeah. I suppose one question we should answer is, what do you think Starmer will do in the face of a Muslim vote going away from Labour? Do we think he'll go dark Labour mode and double down on the Israel stuff, or do we think he will try to win them back, and in so doing he'll just ignore all the white working class people voting Reform, and instead he'll pivot to try and win back all those Muslim voters?
He'll try and win them back.
Well, I don't think he can do both. Yeah, I don't think he can do both. Do you, Armin?
No, of course not.
He's going to have to choose a side on that, And I'm pretty sure.
I think his side will be with the Browns, whoever.
Yeah, he will. He'll pick the Muslim side. Absolutely, I agree with that. But I don't think there's any way Starmer can thread that needle, because there's no hole there to thread. You got to go one side or the other. I mean, even with normies who don't notice that there are far too many Israeli flags at anything that goes on with Tommy Robinson and what have you. Even with people who don't notice that, they still notice the Muslim stuff,
Yeah.
So I think Starmer's got to go one side or the other on that, and I suspect you're entirely right, Alan, and he will go with the Browns. But yeah.
Yeah, it's just there's kind of like they just won't be able to help themselves, will they? Like it's kind of like that was something else actually that a certain I went back and watched. I tell you what I was doing. I went back and watched because I don't watch much of the Duran, right? But I went back and watched the one that a certain former Persian academic was on. And on there, the point came up, which I hear so much from people, where they said they try to imply that there's this like post 9/11 America that was Islamophobic. And yet, and of course, the argument from the leftists is because American racism, blah blah blah, and the argument from the right wingers who bring this up is that they needed to foment Islamophobia to justify wars in the Middle East. But the funny thing was, even though they did need to cement support to go to war in the Middle East, that post 9/11 America was the absolute opposite of Islamophobic. You know, Some of All Fears, the film adaptation of Tom Clancy's book, came out a year afterwards, after 9/11.
Yeah.
Little less than a year after 9/11, but they rewrote the villains who were Islamists in the book, and they rewrote them to Australian neo-Nazis in the film. Like, you know, they were so desperate they were just so desperate to get away from this. And and Stephen Chat has just said Islamic immigration went up in the US after 9/11. Massively as well. It was an enormous transition. You know, so the regime almost can't help itself in these sorts of situations. It can't actually have like a dark mode. They always end up, and they you know, there was this guy, is his name Ashworth? He was an MP for, I think it was Leicester South, a Labour MP. You know, bangs up. Bearing in mind, Leicester is like the city with the greatest number of, by definition, modern day slaves in Britain.
Yep.
I think they believe as much as one in 8
people
why. There. Yeah.
I wonder why.
And he goes on all these shows talking about, on Question Time and stuff, talking about how it's this great success of multiculturalism and does so much for the Islamic vote. And he lost his seat. But you'll see it there. He won't go against any of those narratives. And you'd think they would, you think any smart actor in this situation would see the writing on the wall, see that, oh yeah, demographics is destiny, and you can't really overcome this issue. You can't even go out there swinging for Palestine because they're probably actually just going to get a Muslim to do that and get the same result. And actually you should pivot to something else, but they never do, not ever. A lot of them do seem to suffer with sort of terminal oikophobia.
Yeah, I just don't think they can, Adam. I mean, I think it's like beyond their worldview. They just can't do it.
Yeah. Alabaster in chat as well said it used to be just Dearborn, Michigan, but they have colonies in Texas, probably the state you'd expect to hate them the most. Yeah, the Dearborn, Michigan thing's funny as well, because as a European, you actually do see like these American shows where they mock like obviously like this idea of old red America, and sometimes they will literally name drop places like Dearborn, Michigan, and you see these liberals who are American on Twitter who should know better, and they're posting about like bad literacy in Dearborn, Michigan, or crime, and they're going, oh, look at what the white people are doing. It's like, dude, do you actually know anything about these places? Like, they're not what they used to be.
But they don't do what Martha's Vineyard did, Alan. Do you remember, like a couple of years ago, when they sent all those brown and assorted immigrants up to Martha's Vineyard, and like they were gone within the day, mate.
Yeah,
they didn't stay there one day.
Yeah, it is shocking, but some people in chat are bringing up about obviously the fact that they won't, the fact they'll double down is obviously to do with like Jewish interests. And of course,
sure.
that will be where
For sure.
this might change, which is like, is Starmer willing to cuck on Israel to keep the Muslims? I still think he will, because I think the problem is that the brown worship, which has been built as a necessity of Israeli interests, or you could say Jewish interests, has ended up becoming a sort of a mythos and a story of its own. So I think that they will double down on trying to keep the Muslims in, even if it completely
There's so
undermines
many
the
of them
original.
now.
Yeah,
There's so many of them now. I mean, even just looking on the demographics, there's far more. I suspect, I don't actually know this, but I strongly suspect there are far more Muslim immigrants in the UK than there are people who are Jewish, like of any description. You know,
Well, there's more Muslims in this country than all Welsh people at this
Yeah.
point.
what a surprise! What a surprise!
Yeah, it's
But
too
yeah,
big of
no,
a voting block, and it is a very strong voting block. I don't think they can ignore it either. There was
No.
a point, I think, in 2017 when, like, the Conservatives almost became like the white people's version of you know, Labour for Islam, where it was like a little more than 3 in 5 white British people voted for the Conservatives, but you know, of people that voted. But that's kind of obviously reversed massively and go back to the way it
Well,
was,
yeah,
where
I
the
mean,
white vote is
partly
split across all the parties.
partly because Boris Johnson betrayed everybody very quickly. I mean, you know, but then I knew he was going to do that. I knew his whole "let's get Brexit done" was a con. You know, I knew that, but I'm sure you two did too, but I don't think most ordinary voters did. What we got Brexit in name only, basically, really, for the most part.
Yeah.
And I mean, the Brexit vote, lest people forget, was mostly about stopping mass immigration, I think. I think it was far more about that than it was actually leaving the European Union.
Yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
I'm happy we left the European Union, and I wanted us to, but I also saw that it was mostly about ending mass immigration, that it was a protest vote about that, because British people never get to vote on that, basically, which might be a slight change that reform might now bring to elections, because now if you're anti-mass immigration, you got Farage you can vote for, so long as he keeps it up, of course.
Yeah.
So that could be a change. You know, if Farage is sensible enough to see that is overwhelmingly his most important thing. I mean, all right, as we were saying before we started the stream, I am not at all against Farage from time to time mentioning how ridiculous net zero is and all this kind of stuff. I hope he does do that as well, but not constantly. His constant refrain has got to be mass immigration, mass immigration, mass immigration, and stopping it. And if he does that and keeps to it, reform are just going to grow and grow, as far as I'm concerned. Because as I was saying earlier, the normies can now see this stuff. There's almost nowhere in the British Isles where you can't see what's going on now with this mass immigration.
Yeah. I suppose this is where we've got to make a decision. This is the point where we have to make a big decision as a movement generally, whether we want to put our eggs in the reform basket and try and enter it and do something from within, which I'm not for, but it is a viable option. Or if we now say, right, they've done their job, it's now time to knuckle down. It's now time to knuckle down in our own movements, you know, our own things like Homeland Party and stuff like that, and try and progress from there. I'm more in favour of that one than I think I am the former.
I would say to you, this is my view on this. I'm not at all against the Homeland Party, and I think Farage has opened the field to make it possible for them to get somewhere. But it depends who's running it, and at the moment they have nobody, you know. like it or not, politics requires someone with a bit of charisma and a name. And all right, yes, they may get somebody and it may develop, but as of now, there isn't anyone. And if
Yeah,
you
true,
don't
but I
have any
think that
charisma and a
I think that
name,
can actually be a benefit. Like obviously,
maybe.
like the right has been reformed for a very long. The right has been Farage for a very long time. I think we need to cut away this old baggage and actually genuinely build something that is entirely our own.
But you need
And
someone with a certain amount of charisma to run it.
well,
I'd say.
I do think there's a lot of people in the Homeland Party and indeed in some of the other sort of small groups around that where there is a lot of potential there. Going forward, there is a shit ton of talent in some of these parts of the right. It's very easy for I think some people to be negative and just poke fun and talk about neats and incels on the right, but there is an absolute fuck ton of damage of talent.
Well, you'll never hear me do that, mate. I don't think I've ever done that.
No, but there is a lot of it generally.
Oh yeah, there is absolutely. But if someone shows up who has got some charisma and some good ideas, I will be the first to support them. Haven't seen it yet, but if I do see it, I'll support them absolutely. And there is certainly no way that you're ever going to hear this channel having a go at the Homeland Party. Not going to happen. Not going to happen.
I mean, we were talking about.
We must take that lesson from the left. You don't punch your own way. You just don't.
Yeah. I mean, there's we were talking about turfs earlier. There's obviously you've got Scrump and EP, these two people on the right who people are quite negative about. I mean, I will admit, and I've said this before, I do watch their stuff. You know, I do think that they're worth listening to for some of their takes. I will say that they did a stream on AA's channel with some of the American guys about optimism versus pessimism. I think that was what it was about, something like that. And they didn't come off very well. And I would say that not only since then, but also through this election cycle, that they've still had some takes that were worth listening to. But I don't know. They've come off as kind of very, how would I put this? Like it is almost as if they don't want to see any opportunity of victory ahead, as if they're sort of caught up in their own nihilism.
Yes. Yeah.
Scrump and EP
Mitch is asking who Scrump is. I think that's the boyfriend of the tranny, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's what is it, Scrumps and Evelyn, or the other way around, something like that.
Oh god, that thing.
That's the one, mate. Yes, that's the one.
Yeah, that thing blocks me on Twitter, so I'm not privy to that.
Well, I was talking to Evelyn on Twitter, or actually Evelyn was trying to talk to me on Twitter a couple of weeks ago. And I said, look, if I didn't think you were mentally ill, I might take you seriously. But I do think that Evelyn is mentally ill because it is a bloke pretending to be a girl.
Yeah, I mean, I call them EP because that's what their name was back in the day. I've actually known them for a long time before all of that, although they probably absolutely don't remember me. I've met them IRL, and I struggle to dislike them because having met them IRL, I find them to be quite a likable pair. But they are, of course, you know.
And you're a kind Englishman.
I try to.
You're a kind Englishman.
I'm probably a little bit too kind sometimes. I probably show some people.
Yeah.
Meanwhile,
I'm sorry, I just can't do that. I don't think trannies are mentally ill as far as I'm concerned, so I ain't gonna listen to them about politics. I'm just not.
Yeah, I had to bleed canvas with a transgender individual in Reform, who I really had to hold my tongue around that particular person because he was just like, you know, because the thing was, there was a couple of blokes I was campaigning with who are Christian, so they don't believe this person is a woman for obvious reasons, but they still call
they're
this
not
person
a woman.
a female name.
I'm sorry, they're just not. They can't have children. They're not a woman.
I went into a local Sainsbury's a while back, and I looked around, and there was just blacks everywhere. and I saw this white woman. I was like, oh, finally. I'll go over there and ask her for assistance, a staff member. And they turn around and they probably had more makeup on their face than a Churchill tank does armor, and you could still see the stubble. And I was like, oh dear Lord. I was like, I'm gonna go get me one of these Browns to ask for help instead. But I think Oswolf said Scrump can be a bit black pill, but they do good work in research. I do recommend people watch their stuff on Matt Goodwin, and they've done some really other good stuff. They do some banging research. I don't want to shill, a troon, but it is what it is. I watch breadtubers, so I can't really say I'm not going to watch these people.
I don't watch any of those guys. I'd have another heart attack if I watched those guys.
Yeah, I mean, Dave the Distributor says a problem.
I'm sorry, I don't agree with Troons. I don't agree with trannies, and I certainly don't agree with trannies being involved in politics. And even more than that, I don't agree with trannies being involved with supposedly trad right-wing politics. I just don't. I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. Not on this channel.
But and it's like I get
what you're saying, and I even to some degree I agree with you, but it's just a hypocritical look to me, AA used to have 2 trannies who were regulars on his show.
And the main problem with having most people also is like the fact that you have to control your speech every time, because it's like, you can't call them by the actual name or call them by the actual pronouns, because that pisses them off and that will get them to exit the right wing, and a lot of people don't like it. But it's like, but then it's just a sort of Damocles hanging over your head, because you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, because you feel like you're going to get to your principle by carrying on their delusions. But then if you do carry on it, and if you don't carry on the delusion and you make it clear that you don't, a lot of these people will just cause a stink about you. So it's like, just by clinging on to a true principle, you get shafted by a decent chunk of the right, quote unquote. And I'm sitting there thinking, and apparently there's a BNP bloke who around my area who is now calls himself a woman, and what he does now is he sends not mid-century German themed birthday cards to a lot of his mates in the BNP.
I've got to say, I don't think saying this is punching right in any real way, because I'm sorry, I don't want to be allied with Evelyn and Scrump. I just don't. I don't agree with a part of, maybe they and me would agree on some political stuff, but their basic lifestyle I don't agree with at all. I'm sorry, I just don't. It's no. It's like there are other people on the right who I don't like because of their personal life. Like, I'm not a big Greg Johnson fan, because so far as I understand it, and I could be wrong because obviously I've never met Greg Johnson, but from what I hear, he chases very young boys around the third world.
And that is also
right wing.
I will say though, in that instance that for a long time there wasn't an alternative to what he provided with countercurrents. That said, now there is. There's jonathanbowden.org, which captures all the same stuff. I don't know who runs that though. Maybe it's the same situation. But
Adam, could you put the link for that in the chat, mate?
I can do. Yeah, I'll find it. But with the Scrumps and EP
if you would
thing.
Be so kind.
Yeah, with the Scrumps and EP thing though, there's currently no alternative to a lot of the research that they do provide. But there will be, and there is in some instances little bits here and there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I just think, you know, if we're going to push traditional family values and I don't go overboard on this traditional family value stuff by any means, but if we're going to push that stuff, which I think we probably have to really, going totally against it, as someone in the chat said, it's bad optics, even just leaving the morals alone.
Yeah.
It is. It's because people will call you a hypocrite and they won't be wrong.
Yeah. I can't remember why I brought them up in the first place.
We were talking about research and stuff like that.
Well, I think I was going to make a point about like pessimism surrounding.
Oh yeah, yep. The
Something.
black,
I can't
the
remember what it was
absolute
there.
dark black pill.
Yeah,
It was that.
yeah, where they were like
They
insulting
were
their
just
own
so
supporters.
pessimistic.
Yeah, and it's like, to go back to like the Homeland Party thing, they were bringing up about Kenny Smith, and they were saying things about him to do with his past in the BNP, where they were claiming that he was like the reason the BNP imploded, which is, it's kind of like where you get these clips of, and they posted these clips of Farage going around talking about Farage about when he destroyed the BNP. Like, he didn't destroy the BNP. He's being silly. He's trying to get journos off his back. In the same way that the Tories used to go, look, we've got brown people in our party, we can't be racist. But no one should actually believe that UKIP did anything to destroy the BNP. Like, UKIP was fraught with internal problems by that point. It was basically.
Oh yeah, I mean, look what happened to Jonathan Bowden. I mean, Jonathan Bowden was almost driven to suicide, if he wasn't, in fact. By some of the stuff that people in the BNP were coming out with about him, when he was far and away the best thing the BNP had. You know, it was like,
yeah, and it's like the thing is that, you know, these people claim to be like massive Bowden fans, but they'll go, well, Kenny Smith must be guilty of this because Nick Griffin accused him of it. It's like, yeah, Nick Griffin accused a lot of people of a lot of things. He accused Bowden of being a nonce. You know, it's
exactly, which I think had quite a lot to do with Bowden's tragically early death.
Yeah, I think because you had is it Eddie Butler?
Yes,
I
had Eddie Butler
on
a long stream. You can go and look up on the channel. It's most interesting,
and he
because
said,
Eddie Butler was a friend of Bowden. Yeah,
and he says that like that accusation affected Bowden like gravely,
hugely, yeah.
And
of course, it was utter nonsense, by the way.
Yeah, I never even bothered looking into it, but there is, like, the Kenny Smith thing. There was actually a court case involved in this, and someone else was found guilty, but Kenny Smith wasn't. So, you know, as far, and his strategy as well is pretty sound to me. So I find that there are a lot of people in the right, and that those two also do this, where they are so keen to sling around stones that
Yep.
I don't know, it almost becomes a pastime for some of these people.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. But yeah, if you look into Bowden a bit, and I'm a huge Bowden fan. I'm not saying he was a perfect man, because he certainly wasn't. Right? No one is. We've all got feet of clay. But he was one of the greatest modern orators that you will find anywhere, in any party. And his life was basically destroyed by Nick Griffin accusing him of being a nonce, which he was not. No evidence for that whatsoever. But it nearly destroyed him, and I think it had a lot to do with his early death. I really do.
Yeah.
And as Ammon pointed out, I've got an interview with Eddie Butler, who was one of Bowden's very few friends, and it's Eddie Butler who says that, not me. and he knew him as well as anyone, I suspect.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's don't fall for all the crap that you see coming out on the internet. You know, I know it's an old story and we always say it, but it's true. There's a lot of bullshit on the internet, especially on the right, because we still haven't got that left-wing solidarity where you will almost never see a left-winger slagging off another left-winger. You just won't. You know.
Yeah, I've posted the Eddie Butler video in the chat.
Oh, thanks, Arden. Thank you.
In case anyone does want to go back and watch it.
It's one of the most popular things on the channel, by the way. But yeah, I'd actually like to get Eddie Butler back on here at some stage, although he's very much concentrating on his history stuff these days. But yeah. But I don't know. We've got to take some lessons from the left, and I think two of them are: don't punch right. You know, don't punch against your own side if you can possibly avoid it. And on the other one, I think we've got to do is we've got to take small wins when we get them. Is Nigel Farage perfect for us? No, of course he isn't. But he has moved the Overton window a long way in the last 4 weeks. He's done more to move the Overton window in the last 4 weeks than all of us have done in the last 3 years. I don't know what you guys think about that, Adam and Mitch, but that's what I think. But you know, whatever.
I'll consider them wins when they could be materialized into something. But it is good signs.
Yeah. I will say to Sonny Jim in the chat, I've got nothing against Years, who I believe has a medical condition, as far as I understand. I got nothing against Years. You know, if you got a medical condition, okay, you got a medical condition. Not the same as being a tranny, as far as I'm concerned, but that's just me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in a way, the trannies have medical conditions too. They've got mental health issues.
Mental medical conditions.
Yeah, but that is the thing. I mean, let's not get into a Troon discussion, but it is the only dysphoria that we treat by leaning into it as a society, rather than, you know, no one, you know, if an anorexic walks into a doctor's office, you don't go, well, you know, no wonder you're trying to diet. Look at you fat pig. You know, it doesn't happen.
Yeah, true. Very true. Very true. I do agree with that. I'd just like to point out that we had 60 viewers a little while ago, which I think is pretty good for us on a like a one-time viewers. It's pretty good. But yeah, Vex Peril, I think you're pretty much right what you say there. Oswolf makes a good point here, which I think is also true and happens on the right quite often.
Yes.
Because we're on YouTube, I'm not going to make a big fuss about it because we're on YouTube. And but yeah, Oswolf, what he says there is not entirely wrong, because they do. And you know, we're all right-wing organizations are infected with that to a greater or lesser degree. No doubt about that whatsoever.
Yeah, I can hear the
people can get a bit paranoid.
I can hear the wildlife sounds from your jungle paradise.
The 77th Brigade. There. You know, the 77 Brigade guys are typing away. You know. Shiny asses who call themselves soldiers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with what Goth Bureaucrat says to some degree. I do actually feel sad for them in that respect. But on the other hand, what we have at the moment is a society which caters to them. And they do so for the deliberate reason of like making life worse for everybody else, who's the vast majority of people.
Yeah.
The reason that the Democrats in America and the Labour Party in Britain and the so-called Conservative Party in Britain go along with that shit for the most part is not because they believe in it. I don't think that's true for a minute. It's because it's convenient for them and helps destroy traditional families and all the rest of it. That's what they're really after doing.
Yeah, I do think a lot of them do get sort of swept up in it, though.
Some, yeah, for sure.
And they sort of start to believe their own bullshit after a while.
I think that's true of some of them, but I think a lot of it is just because if you can, the more you can destroy the traditional family unit, the easier people are to manipulate.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think any of us would argue that a family that is like a single mum, as good as some, I'm sure there are good single mums out there. I'm not saying there are none, but even good single mums are not as good at bringing up kids as a couple are. A man and a woman, they're not. Because, boys need men because they're boys copy their dads, basically, But women also need men because daughters tend to try and find a bloke like their father. They do. This is, there's a reason why humans are brought up by couples. It's because that's the best way to bring up kids. It is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like for years, there was so much research into how harmful fatherless homes were for sons, but there wasn't any for young girls. But most of that is, of course, just because when boys become troublesome, it's more obvious because they're going out being violent, causing criminal damage, stuff like that. As with girls, it's more subtle and it's more sort of like internalized.
It tends to be high body counts and stuff,
Yeah.
Absolutely right. But it's if you ever meet a good girl, right, and there are good girls out there, despite what
tons
some people on the right claim. If you ever meet a good girl, she had a good relationship with her dad and liked him, and she will generally be looking for a bloke who has at least some of the characteristics of her father. So,
Yeah, but in that note, though, I do need to get off. It's gone 11.
Well, thanks very much for joining us, Armin. You're the co-founder of this stream, so you are always welcome, of course. So thanks for joining us, mate.
Yep, no problem. Talk to you all later.
I was going to ask you one question before you go, Armin. Right? I remember going to Canterbury when I was a little tiny kid. First time I ever went there, my dad took me, and we went to Canterbury Cathedral and looked at the Black Prince's tomb and all this kind of stuff. And I've been there a couple of times since then, and it always struck me as like really lovely little English country town. Has it changed a lot recently? Because I haven't been there for 20 years, I guess.
It's expanded a bit, more housing. They redeveloped some of the areas in town. Like there was the old tannery. They rebuilt that into flats. It has in the last sort of like since lockdown got an enormous amount more diverse. Probably like a solid, I don't know, maybe 15 to 20%.
Wow.
There was a point I went out during lockdown on my bicycle and rode along the river there along the Stour, and I literally, as soon as I got into town, I didn't see a single white person until I got to where I was going. But it usually doesn't look that bad. Oh, we do also, I will point out, we do have some tents around the ring road, like those American cities.
That's a shame, mate. But it used to be an idyllic little country town in Kent. Really nice, But and of course a place of pilgrimage going back to the Middle Ages. So
Right. Yep. On that note, then I'll leave you.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Talk to you later. Good
Goth
night, everyone.
Bureaucrat asks, good night, Alan. Goth Bureaucrat asks, when do we check super chats? End of the stream, mate. It's the last thing I do before we end the stream. Mitch, any final thoughts on anything or anything you want to talk about or plug or what have you?
On topic of what do we do considering reform and homeland, I mean, it's going to be, I mean, even if, let's say, I mean, I can imagine for the next general election we'll help reform as best we can, because as I was saying a bit earlier, our political climate is volatile enough that someone like Homeland, because I mean, Homeland's got very good focus on local elections and then going up the ladder, so to speak. Reform is finding that out a hard way, and it depends on what happens with that localizing focus that Forge is talking about. Because on one hand, it's reform's dangerous in the sense that, well, if it's not just Forge, but let's say that party has a CivNat influence and it keeps people locked in that CivNat consensus. That's a danger, but at the same time, it's also, well, I don't think the party will go much beyond Forge. I don't think there's really much. Like, you got Ben Habib, who's all right, but I mean, as good as he is, I mean, do we want a half English, half Pakistani fella? I mean, he's very he's much more based than Forge.
No.
I'll be honest. I mean, UKIP had said he was quite based in terms of stuff he said, but sorry, I don't want a half English, half Pakistani fella as a leader.
I'd prefer not to have that. I've got to say, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's. I mean, to be he's half English, so there's that nuance. But but aside from, I mean, I just don't see after Farage what future does that party have, unless. I mean, if they're going to go ahead and put that Zia Yusuf fella in charge, that is going to be as dab a squib ending as you can imagine.
Oh no, that will be the end of it. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah,
if they do that,
it'd be like
that will be.
It's like season 8 to Game of Thrones. That would be like that. It'd be ending the same way as Game of Thrones did if they were to do that. So.
All I would say though, Mitch, is that there are far too many people on the right who are willing to turn around and say that is gonna be what's gonna happen, and this is what Atman was talking about with the total black pill doomers, sometimes you need to give yourself a little bit of hope, you do.
Yeah. Yeah, what I always say is
you need
even
to
if
see
let's say
a possible
reform,
light at the end of the tunnel,
Yeah, but we need to establish connections within reform, so then that way, when Homeland Party is in a position to do so and can start contesting election, he can cannibalise off reform. Because I don't think reform is going to be around after Farage goes. Let's say Farage becomes prime minister for like a term. I'm not fully sure what to make of it in the sense that, on one hand, he'll keep people locked in the whole CivNat, Martin Luther King type of consensus. But maybe it's also, well, he's a net good.
Maybe.
But it's at the end of it, I mean, because someone said if Farage's immigration policies and his policy regarding deporting illegals and whatnot were to materialise, we'd go from 73% native British to 80% native British over time, just through suspending mass immigration and deporting a lot of illegals and whatnot. Because I won't be surprised if we've got I won't be surprised if we've got a 6-digit number amount of illegals in this country.
But I would definitely support that, and that would definitely make the position in Britain a bit better.
Yeah, because I've still not made my mind up as to whether I'm joining reform, because I know full well that I've got a bit of an internet history where someone in reform will shit the bed over something I've said like 2 years ago, whatever, and I'll get turfed out.
What you need to do, Mitch, listen, Mitch, in my humble opinion, what you need to do is wait and see what happens with reform and wait and see what happens with Farage and what he actually comes out with. The thing is, the only reason I give reform a little bit of room is that when people like Dan and Bo were sacked from reform as candidates, totally wrongly, in my opinion, because fucking idiot Tice took notice of Hope Not Hate, which is an extreme left-wing pro-Israeli organization. that was not under Farage, and that's the only reason I give them. I give for Reform a little bit of room. Yeah, but we'll see what happens if Farage does that. Then my support for him won't last that long. You know, it won't.
Yeah, it's really one of those things where it's very nuanced situation. Because on one hand, well, we've got a homeland party, but it's going to be ages before they really get set up in terms of being able to take over councils and eventually seats in parliament. But as I said earlier, we don't need proportional representation, and I think this is one mistake that Homeland Party is making. We don't need proportional representation, but politics we have a
No,
volatile
because
enough
if
that.
you have it, they'll never get anywhere. They'll do to them what the French are currently doing to Le Pen. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you.
Yeah, it's the same with same in Germany, where I think I can't remember which state. I think it was Thuringen, where the Conservative Party, they said it, Angela Merkel's party, they literally allied with all the with the likes of Die Linke, SPD, and Greens to lock out the AFD, who were making a lot of inroads. So even under proportional representation, literally the entire Unity Party will still find a way to block you out as much as possible. Unless you first pass the post. If all the right wingers rally behind one party, that party has a standing chance to monopolize its fighting ground and take on the left. Because the thing about the left is they've all got these different factions like Lib Dems, Labour, Greens, Tory Wets, SNP, and Plaid Cymru, and it becomes a situation where the two split in the middle in a first past the post system, whereas in PR, always left wing factions would just all unite in every coalition. So nothing. So in fact, we'd be screwing ourselves over by bringing in proportional representation.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with any of that, mate. I don't disagree with any of that at all. Okay,
Yeah,
somebody asked me to
say,
check super chats, but it doesn't look like we have any as far as I can see.
Yeah, I don't really know the great detail about TUVs and Alliance of Reform, but I mean, I like TUV because the DUP are so mired with scandals left, right, and centre. Like they've gone through so many leaders the past 5 years that the time's up and they need to be replaced by TUV. Like Jim McAllister seems to be quite very right wing fella up in Northern Ireland. I've heard Tristan, unfortunately, came last place in his North Antrim seat, so. But I don't know where Tristan goes from in terms of his party. He puts him down as independent. No. I don't know. I thought he had his own party or something. He gets put down as independent for some reason.
Okay, I was asked to check super chats, and I'm checking super chats on Entropy at the moment, and I can't see any. So if we had any, I would read them out, but we don't seem to have any as far as I can see. I am just double checking, but I don't think we have any. So if you send a super chat to Entropy, it has not reached me, mate, so I'm not able to read it.
Yeah, I don't know.
I've had super chats on Entropy, but
yeah,
I can't see any on random.
I wonder what the skinny is about this reform alliance with TUV, because I quite like TUV from what I've heard about them, very right wing party. So, well, that's
yes, they are.
And like the DUP,
I've heard
they're scandal left, right, and centre. They need to go, in my opinion, because they discredit unionism.
What the hell? Excuse me,
Hello.
guys. I'm just pissballing around with Entropy. But In theory, I could actually monetize my channel on YouTube. I just don't think it would be a very good idea, to be honest. I don't think it would last very long if I did, I gotta say. But I don't have much faith in YouTube as a free speech platform. You know. What doesn't need to be open? Okay, well, we'll see what happens on this. I'm just checking this. Golf bureaucrat, as far as I can see, I haven't got any, but I am reloading it to see if it's to see if I missed anything. Chris O'Hanlon is asking, because I know you know something about this, Mitch. What do you know about the fifth reform guy who got elected? This is the one we've been talking about a couple of
James
times.
McMurdoch, who got elected in Basildon's safe. Not much because he's a paper candidate. Well, he was a paper candidate who won very unexpectedly. Like, no one expected him to win, but yeah, he won on his own merit. Apparently, he's 38. He was born in 1986, which I'm surprised by. I thought he was born in 1996. But then again, millennials generally tend to look younger than their actual years, so bear that in mind.
This is true.
And
we do actually have a couple of super chats, guys. I've reloaded it and I've seen them. Right, the first one is from Margraf, and it's for $10 and says, "Thanks for your time and your interesting perspectives. What are your realistic best and worst case predictions for the next 4 or 5 years in Britain?" There you go, Mitch. Did you hear that, mate?
hear what?
Okay, I'll read it again, Mitch. This is from
there's a delay over
Margraf.
Once you.
Yeah, it probably is, mate, because I've been reloading my screens and all that stuff. He sent us $10. In fact, he sent us $13 because he sent a test earlier. And he's asking, "Thanks for your time and your interesting perspectives. What are your realistic best and worst case predictions for the next 4 to 5 years in Great Britain?"
Best realistic is if we get reform winning. Let's say, for argument's sake, like if they totally destroy the Conservative Party, and even though reform might fizzle out, it still leaves wide open that gap because no one's really going to fund the Tory Party if they can't win elections anymore, and they've got challenges to their right, as well as also Homeland Party building up their own infrastructure. Worst outcome, however, is if reform can really do a damn squid moment if they have a Zia Youssef fellow in charge before they've double tapped the Tories to death, and we go back to Tories versus Labour non-stop.
Yeah, totally agree, Mitch. That's the worst case scenario. Best case scenario, the Reform Party win 2 or 3 by-elections over the next 2 or 3 years, get 1 or 2 defectors from the so-called Conservatives. So you end up with like 10 Reform MPs behind Farage. And Farage can effectively create a serious on-the-ground political party who can actually turn all those votes they got, and coming second in over 100 seats, can turn that into an actual election victory. I mean, that's the best scenario in my opinion. But
yeah, what we need really is the Conservative Party to go the same way as the Liberal Party did 100 years ago, where split down the middle, can't agree on anything, and they just all fizzle away with all those worth their salt still in the Conservative Party. Like, let's say Edward Lee, for example, who he's all right. I don't know why he's still in the Conservative Party because I mean he's very conservative. He's like anti-abortion, for example, so it's quite anti. He's quite actual conservative. Why the hell is still in the Tory Party is beyond me. You might as well just defect over to him because he's the one. He's the first voice to start saying the Tories need to embrace Farage alongside Suella Braverman, but that faction of the Tory Party, yeah, there's too many woke MPs like Alicia Kearns. David Cameron has done his damage to the Tory Party. There's no way you're going to see a Boris Johnson light candidate get him back in. So
I don't think so. No, there are people who claim that Boris Johnson might make a comeback, and I think that is possibly true. But Boris Johnson's a con job. Boris Johnson LARPs as a populist, but he ain't. Not at all.
Yeah, but this is the thing. I've come across reform voters who were said, "Oh well," and I said to them, "If Boris was Prime Minister still, would you vote for Tory?" And they go, "Yeah," because this is a problem. Like the average voter is thick as pig shit for the most part, so they're easily duped by Boris, and this is where
guys, Boris Johnson LARPs as a populist, but he's not. He's an absolute globalist. Boris Johnson was the bloke they sent over to Ukraine to make sure 500,000 Ukrainians got killed in the war with Russia. That's who Boris Johnson really is. And actually nobody calls him Boris. Everyone who knows him calls him Alexander Johnson. The fact that he even has a fake first name, you know?
Well, I don't really get why people fake first name. That's a Slavic name. That's not even an English name, is it? And in fact, like he's like a Turkish or something. Like great grandfather of his was a Turkish minister.
He does have some of that. Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, but I mean, look, the best result is that, as I say, as far as I'm concerned, the Reform Party pick up 2 or 3 by-election results over the next 3 years. Maybe get 1 or 2 actually right-wing conservative defectors. That would be all right. So you had 10 Reform MPs by the time of the next election. But also Farage has got to build up an actual on-the-ground organisation. And if he can turn the 100+ seats where Reform came second at this election with only 4 weeks' notice, if he can turn those into actual victories, and there's no reason he can't, to be honest, the game might well change. And as Mitch said, that's going to be the end of the so-called Conservative Party, which is, of course, what we want. Oswald, yeah, Boris is scum. I totally agree. But anyway, I hope that I answered Gough Bureaucrat's question for his very generous super chat. But yeah, it's who knows? You know, we're a couple of days after the election. We've got to watch carefully what happens. I mean, I saw someone in the chat earlier said, "Don't box yourself into a corner." Absolutely correct. Don't, because you've got to remain flexible if you're on the right. You've got to use tactical voting. You've got to see who's standing at the next general election, which is going to be at least, realistically, it's going to be 4 or 5 years away. You know, Labour might call it early if they see some reason to do so, but otherwise, they're going to be there for 5 years. One of the worst things that might happen is Labour might import another 3 million third-world immigrants into Britain during that time. And if you really want me to tell you the truth, I think that's quite likely, actually. Will Labour do anything to stop the small boats? Personally, I doubt it, but they might. Will they reduce the actual mass immigration levels? I'll be amazed if they do, frankly. If anything, I'm expecting Labour to put them up.
I think AA had a point about when he said at some point Starmer's going to have to pivot towards being perceived at the very least as having reduced immigration. Otherwise, he's just going to fuel the flames of reform. And then the problem is Apostolic Majesty as you said, he reckons because of Farage and the fall of a Reform Party, the Tories are done because the Tories are torched for long-term viability. Anyway, I think I saw something like below the age of 35 or 45, no one votes for them. So Zoomers and millennials don't vote Tory at all. It's only really mostly boomers and Gen Xers voting Tory. And even men, like with Gen Xers, I mean, it's real kettle of fish compared to the boomers. So
Puffwagon in the chat is saying the Tories are going to win the 29 general election. I don't think that's true at all. I really doubt that myself.
I won't be surprised if we get
I would see because Labour's not popular, mate, even now, and they haven't even done.
No, I'm saying hung Parliament because I reckon Reform they won't win enough seats to get a majority, but they're still going to win a huge chunk of seats to a point where they could act as kingmaker. But I don't think there'll be enough left-wing MPs
maybe.
I think we might get 2 elections.
I don't see the Tories winning the 29 election. I really don't. I just don't see it. I think that's very, very unlikely. That's to me, Reform are more likely to win 2029 than the Conservatives are, but that's just me. Because don't forget, in 2029, there's going to be a lot less boomers than there are now. The one thing about the boomers, who everyone on the right hates so much, although I don't think it's totally fair because there are some okay boomers, but I do think that the thing that everyone forgets is there are less and less boomers every year. They just are. To be a boomer, you had to be born by 1960. That was a long time ago, guys. But I mean, that's just my view. But we'll see what happens. Overall, I think this election wasn't as bad. When it first ended, I was very disappointed with the result. But the Conservatives have their worst election results since 1838. The Labour Party have got a historic low in terms of voting. 9 million votes in a country of over 60 million people is pretty pathetic, to be honest. Democracy, in air quotes. And Farage is in Parliament, which, everyone on the right, as far as I'm concerned, wanted. And let's now hope he hammers mass immigration week after week after week in Parliament, because that's what he's got to do. Any final thoughts, Mitch?
No, not from me.
All right, mate. Thank you very much for joining us as a guest. You're always welcome, mate. You're one of the regulars on the stream. Thanks to the chat for joining us. We will be back next week with Splendid Isolation number 180. Sonny Jim says boomers are born before 65, not 60. I don't think you're right, mate. They're baby boomers from World War II. I'm sorry, if you were born 20 years after the end of World War II, how the fuck are you a baby boomer from the end of World War II? That's ridiculous, all right? Anyway, there we go. But I'm biased because I was born in 1965 and I'm not a boomer, so there you go. But anyway, thanks for joining us, guys. We'll be back next week. In the meantime, don't let the bastards grind you down.